customer service sector in Nigeria. And then we have Dr. Chinyere Okafor, who is Professor of English and Women's Studies at Wichita State University, who will be presenting on Nigeria, past, present, and future.
Over time, I began to just do a lot of research on customer service and its impact on different types of companies. And I decided to study for my master's thesis, customer service emergence in the Nigerian service sector. Just to give you a brief background, Nigeria is located on West Africa, right on the Atlantic coast, and it's very, very populous country. Actually, the most populous in Africa. And considering this about twice the size of California, it's a lot of people, and all of those people seem to live in Lagos, which is where I grew up. And one thing with Nigeria, I think it's a similar issue that you find in a lot of African countries is there is massive wealth, but that somehow doesn't seem to translate in terms of helping people in the country. And so the same thing goes for Nigeria as well, is that there are so many natural resources and so much manpower. However, economically that hasn't translated to actually enriching the whole country as a whole. And some of the problems are that the economy isn't very balanced. So we're primarily dependent on oil as the primary major resource. However, what happens is if there's a problem in oil production, because other sectors of the economy aren't as well developed, then that throws the whole economy off. However, in spite of all of those different things, of recent, there has been a lot of development in services in the country in the past 10, 15 years. And so I was really interested in looking at the service sector specifically. First of all, one of the reasons for the increased development in services is that there has been increased foreign investment by countries like China that has stimulated competition in the service sector, is the fact that the economy has opened up. So areas of the economy that were only run by government-run organizations have now opened up to private-run organizations. So in light of all of these different things, this kind of gives us a cross-section of what the Nigerian service sector looks like and what it comprises of. The areas in bold are the areas I decided to focus on: business services, which are, in summary, services that support other types of organizations, your ISPs, your internet service providers, and security companies. Then also I was looking at communication services, specifically at telecommunications, which is one of the fastest growing areas in the service sector in Nigeria, and then also at financial services, the banking sector. Those are the three quickest growing areas of the service sector currently now. So I decided to look at those three different areas in my thesis research. In addition, I decided to look at just Lagos, which is kind of the commercial hub of the country, and probably one of the most diverse cities in the country as well. So I focused on those three major areas, and I was looking at Lagos specifically. I had 5 research questions, and I'm going to kind of summarize them so I don't bore you horribly with them. But so the first thing I wanted to find out was, was first of all, how do Nigerians view customer service? I remember when I was growing up, there was a place in terms of people doing things to retain customers and so on and so forth. So I wanted to find out, with the changes in competition in the country, if customer service practices were evolving with those changes in the economy and how those were evolving. So the first thing I wanted to find out was, how do Nigerian service sector executives, how do they look at customer service and conceptualize that? Do they see it as important in maintaining their organizations? And if so, how do their customer service practices support their customer service goals? And then I also wanted to look at how do they experience customer service in their everyday lives, both corporately and individually as well. And then finally, what are the barriers to developing a quality customer service culture in the country? My participants were executives in the 3 areas that I showed you in the service sector, and I recruited them from Lagos, and they were those 3 different areas, and I interviewed about 10 different people for this, and I did the research in 2 phases. Phase 1 I interviewed 4 key informants, and then in phase 2 I interviewed 6 key informants. The differences between phase 1 and phase 2 were I had to modify some of my questions and some of my methodologies. I moved on. But in phase 1, I asked 12 questions. After I did the first pilot stage, I kind of realized some of my questions needed some modification. So I added a couple of questions so I could better address my research objectives. And what I did was the first, and just really briefly, the first thing I did was interview each person. Usually the interviews were between 45 minutes to an hour. And then from getting all of my data, I condensed all of that data into comprehensive files and then analyzed them as a whole, but I analyzed each phase separately, phase 1 and phase 2, because of the differences in questions. And my themes, the themes I came up with in my findings can be separated into this 5 different areas, and that's what I wanted to focus on a little bit more this evening in telling you what I found. The first thing I found in terms of how people conceptualize, how the service sector leaders conceptualize customer services, first of all, in phase 1 they defined customer service primarily as offering satisfaction, but to the end of keeping customers. And one of the major things that they emphasized was the increased competition in the service sector. One very interesting comment that somebody made was how previously in Nigeria was a seller's market. So basically, you could have a very, very important product and only one person was offering it, so they called the shots. And so if you didn't want their service, well, bye-bye. You had nowhere else to go. However, now with increased competition in the market, there's so much more of a struggle for customers and retaining customers. And so competition has played a major role in increasing customer service practices. One thing that was mentioned was, even though it's a completely different context, in terms of what people expect in terms of customer service, that really hasn't changed that much. People still expect the same thing. People still expect to be respected. What does change is what the definition of respect is. So for example, here in America, if you were getting a service from somebody, your idea of respect might be to be spoken to politely, for somebody to be direct with you, and so on and so forth. However, in Nigeria, for example, one thing that in some areas is common is it's rude to look people straight in the eye for too long. And so respect in that area, so you might think you're respecting that person, but they might be like, will you stop looking at me in the eyeballs? That is so rude. And so the basic ideas of what people want in customer service, respect, courtesy, and such are the same. However, the methods in which to do that are completely different. But that's what it means by universal expectations. Another thing that was mentioned was that Nigerian customers like to feel important. They like to feel acknowledged, and you sometimes have to go the extra mile. Sometimes you have to kiss the baby, sometimes you have to attend the bridal shower, and you have to do all those different things because service is still very personal and it's still a little more informal, so to speak. Then in phase 2, another thing that was mentioned was timeliness and promptness of service delivery, as well as meeting and exceeding customer expectations. And the second one on timeliness and promptness kind of makes a lot of sense if you consider Lagos. Lagos, again, is an extremely congested city. And to get from point A to point B sometimes takes hours because there's just so much traffic on the road. One of the major issues was delivering service to people in a prompt, timely manner. And that was one of the focuses of giving quality customer service. Then the second part of this was trying to gauge how the people I interviewed saw the importance of customer service. Because a lot of times the assumption was that because there really hadn't been a whole bunch of customer service before, that people really didn't care. However, I found kind of the opposite.
Did it matter whether you talked to a man or female, what their thought process was on customer service?
It was actually very, very similar. Actually, the funny thing was, it seemed that the female businesswomen I spoke to, they were actually much tougher. So, for example, now there was I had asked, one of the questions I asked them was if they gave rewards to their employees for exceptional performance in customer service and so on and so forth. And one of the female businesswomen I interviewed, she said something really funny. She was like, no, that's what I pay them for.
Compared to the U.S., what is the size of Nigeria? She mentioned something about the size of Nigeria being 2 times the size of California.
Oh, that's better for the young lady. I know in so many developing countries that there is this culture of nothing moves unless you pay a bribe. Is that still the case in Nigeria?
In some aspects, it's very much about who you know a lot of times, and I'm not going to make a sweeping generalization that that's what it always has been, but in my experience, that's been how it was a lot of times when I was growing up. But you still have people that refuse to do that.